Hey everyone, it has been quite a bit of time. Just been dealing with some stuff, but in the meantime, I did have a few projects. This is one of them that I was working on. So enjoy. And as always, please like, subscribe, share, follow me on Instagram or TikTok, and you can definitely support me through Patreon at Late Beginnings. So thank you again, and here we go. Stardust by Neil Gaiman. Chapter 1, in which we learn of the village of Wall and of all the curious things that occur there every 9 years. There was once a young man who wished to gain his heart's desire, and while that is, as beginnings go, not entirely novel, for every tale about every young man there ever was or will could start in a similar manner. There was much about this young man and what happened to him that was unusual, although even though he never knew the whole of it. What happened to him was, as the tale started, as many tales have started, in Wall. The town of Wall stands today as it stood for 600 years on a high jut of granite amidst a small forest woodland. The houses of Wall are square and old, built of grey stone, the dark slate roofs and high chimneys taking advantage of every square space on the rock. The houses lean into each other, are built one upon the next, with here and there a bush or tree growing out of the side of the building. There is one road from Wall, a winding track rising sharply up from the forest, where it is lined with rocks and small stones. Followed far enough south out of the forest, the track becomes real road, paved with asphalt. Followed further, the road gets larger, is packed at all hours with cars, trucks rushing from city to city. Eventually, the road takes you to London. But London is a whole night's drive from Wall. The inhabitants of Wall are a taciturn breed, falling into two distinct types. The native Wall folk, as grey and tall and stocky as the granite outcrop of their town was built upon, and the others who have made Wall their home over the years and their descendants. Below Wall on the west is the forest. To the south is a treacherously placid lake served by the two streams that drop from the hills behind Wall to the north. There are fields upon the hills, on which sheep graze. To the east is more woodland. Immediately to the east of Wall is a high, grey rock wall, from which the town takes its name. This wall is old, built of rough, square lumps of hewn granite, and it comes from the woods and goes back to the woods once more. There is only one break in the wall, an opening about 6 feet in width, a little to the north of the village. Through the gap in the wall can be seen a large green meadow. Beyond the meadow a stream, and beyond the stream there are trees. From time to time shapes and figures can be seen amongst the trees in the distance, huge shapes and odd shapes, and a small glimmering things which flash and glitter and are gone. Although it is perfectly good meadow land, none of the villagers have ever grazed animals on the meadow on the other side of the wall, nor have they used it for growing crops. Instead, for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, they have posted guards on each side of the opening of the wall, and done their best to put it out of their minds. Even today, Two townsmen stand on either side of the opening, night and day, taking 8-hour shifts. They carry hefty wooden cudgels. They flank the opening of the town side. Their main function is to prevent the town's children from going through the opening into the meadow and beyond. Occasionally, they are called upon to discourage a solitary rambler or one of the few visitors to the town from going through the gateway. The children they discourage simply with displays of the cudgel, while ramblers and visitors are concerned. They are more intentive, only using physical force as a last resort if tales of new planted grass or a dangerous bull on the loose are not sufficient. Very rarely, someone comes to the wall knowing what they are looking for, and these people they will sometimes allow through. There is a look in the eyes, and once seen it cannot be mistaken. There have been no cases of smuggling across the wall in all the 12th century that the townfolks know of, and they pride themselves on this. The guard is relaxed once every 9 years on May Day when a fair comes to the meadow. The events that follow transpired many years ago. Queen Victoria was on the throne of England, but she was not yet the black-clad widow of Windsor. She had apples in her cheeks, and a spring in her step, and Lord Melbourne often had cause to upbraid gently the young queen for her flightness. She was as yet unmarried, although she was very much in love. Mr. Charles Dickens was serializing his novel Oliver Twist. Mr. Draper had just taken the first photograph of the moon, freezing her pale face on cold paper. Mr. Morse had recently announced a way of transmitting messages down metal wires. Had you mentioned magic or fairy to any of them, they would have smiled at you disdainfully, except perhaps for Mr. Dickens, at the time a young man and beardless. He would have looked at you wistfully. People were coming to the British Isles that spring. They came in ones, they came in twos, and they landed at Dover or in London or in Liverpool. Men and women with skins as pale as paper, skins as dark as volcanic rock, skins the color of cinnamon, speaking in a multitude of tongues. They arrived all through April, and they traveled by steam train, by horse, by caravan or cart, and many of them walked. At that time, Dustin Thorne was 18, and he was not a romantic. He had nut-brown hair and nut-brown eyes and nut-brown freckles. He was a middling tall and slow of speech. He had an easy smile which illuminated his face from within, and he dreamed. When he daydreamed in his father's meadow of leaving the village of Wall and all its unpredictable charm, and going to London or Edinburgh or Dublin or some great town where nothing was dependent on which way the wind was blowing, he worked on his father's farm, and owned nothing save a small cottage in a far field given to him by his parents. Visitors were coming to Wall that April for the fair, and Dunstan resented them. Mr. Bromeo's inn, the Seventh Magpie, normally a warren of empty rooms, had filled for a week. And now the strangers had begun to take rooms in the farms and private houses, paying for their lodgings with strange coins and herbs and spices, and even with gemstones. As the day of the fair approached, the atmosphere of anticipation mounted. People were waking earlier, counting days, counting minutes. The guards on the gate and at the sides of the wall were restive and nervous. Figures and shadows moved in the trees at the edge of the meadow. In the seventh magpie, Bridget Comfrey, who was widely regarded as the most beautiful pot girl in living memory, was provoking friction between Tommy Forrester, with whom she had been seen to step over the previous year, and a huge man with dark eyes and a small, cluttering monkey. The man spoke little English, but he smiled expressively whenever Bridget came by. In the pub's tap room, the regulars sat in awkward proximity to the visitors, speaking so. It's only every 9 years. They say in the old days it was every year at midsummer. Ask Mr. Bromios. He'll know. Mr. Bromios was tall, and his skin was olive. His black hair was curled tightly on his head. His eyes were green. As the girls of the village became women, they took notice of Mr. Bromios, but he did not return their notice. It was said that he had come to the village quite some time ago, a visitor. But he had stayed in the village, and his wine was good, so the locals agreed. A loud argument broke out in the public lounge between Tommy and the dark-eyed man whose name appeared to be Alum Bay. "Stop them! In the name of heaven, stop them!" shouted Bridget. "They're going to back out and fight over me." And she tossed her head prettily, so that the light of the old oil lamps caught her perfect golden curls. Nobody moved to stop the men, although a number of people and villagers and newcomers alike went outside to spectate. Tommy Forrester removed his shirt, raised his fists in front of him. The stranger laughed and spat onto the grass, and then he seized Tommy's right hand and sent him flying onto the ground, chin first. Tommy clambered to his feet and ran at the stranger. He landed a glancing blow on the man's cheek before finding himself face down in the ground, his face being slammed into the mud. With the wind knocked out of him, Alum Bay sat atop of him and chuckled and said something in Arabic. That quickly and that easily, the fight was over. Alum Bay climbed off Tommy Forrester, and he strutted over to Bridget Comfrey, bowed low to her, and grinned with gleaming teeth. Bridget ignored him, and ran to Tommy. "Why, whatever has he done to you, my sweet?" she asked, and mopped the mud from his face with her apron and called him all manners of endearments. Alum Bay went, and with the spectators, back into the public rooms of the inn, and he graciously bought Tommy Forrester a bottle of Mr. Bromios's Chablis when Tommy returned. Neither of them was quite certain who had won or who had lost. Dunstan Thorne was not in the seventh magpie that evening. He was a practical lad who had, for the last 6 months, been courting Daisy Hempstock, a young woman of similar practicality. They would walk on fair evenings around the village and discuss the theory of crop rotation and the weather and other such sensible matters. And on these walks, upon which they were invariably accompanied by Daisy's mother and younger sister walking a healthy 6 paces behind, they would, from time to time, stare at each other lovingly. At the door to the Hempstocks, Dunstan would pause and bow and take his farewell, and Daisy would walk into her house and remove her bonnet and say, "I do wish Mr. Thorne would make up his mind to propose, and I'm sure Papa would not even be adverse to it." "Indeed, I am not. I am sure that he would not," said Daisy's mamma, on this evening, as she said on every such evening, and she removed her own bonnet and her gloves and led her daughters to the drawing-room, in which a tall gentleman with a very long black beard was sitting sorting through his pack. Daisy and her mamma and her sister bobbed curtsies to the gentleman, who spoke little English and had arrived a few days before. The temporary lodger, in his turn, stood and bowed to them, and then returned to his pack of wooden oddments, sorting, arranging, and polishing. It was chilly that April, with the awkward changeability of English spring. The visitors came up the narrow road through the forest from the south. They filled the spare rooms, they bunked out in cowbrees and barns. Some of them raised colored tents, and some of them arrived in their own caravans, drawn by huge gray horses or by small, shaggy ponies. In the forest there was a carpet of bluebells. On the morning of April the 29th, Dunstan Thorne drew guard duty on the gap of the wall, with Tommy Forrester. They stood on each side of the gap in the wall, and they waited. Dunstan had done guard duty many times before, but hitherto his task had consisted of simply standing and, on occasion, shooing away children. Today he felt important. He held a wooden cudgel, and as each stranger to the village came up to break in the wall, Dunstan or Tommy would say, Tomorrow, no one's coming through today, good sirs." And the stranger would retreat in a little way and stare through the break in the wall at the unassuming meadow beyond it, and at the unexceptional trees that dotted the meadow, at the rather dull forest behind it. Some of them attempted to strike up conversation with Dunstan or Tommy, but the young men, proud of their status as guards, declined to converse, contenting themselves by raising their heads, tightening